Welcome to Tech Startup Stories, hosted by Natalie Binns. This is the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the B2B startup world.
Hi, I'm Natalie Binns, and I'm the host of Tech Startup Stories. This podcast is really designed to share the unique and challenging journeys of all the people that are building small startups to scale-ups in the tech space. My background? Initially, I was in sales, and then I moved into marketing, and I've been lucky enough to work with some amazing tech companies. But my passion is really startups. And that led me back to helping tech startups set up their marketing and go-to-market functions where the budgets are tight and the resources are few and far between. So let's get into this week's podcast. Welcome to the show. Today, I'm speaking with Bill Mann from Inception Cyber. Bill and I go way back. I think the first time I met you was 2012 when you were at CA and you happened to come over to Ditton Park in Slough. And I was working for CA. And then I moved to Centrify, and then you joined Centrify in the US, and then you became my boss for a while as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you were. And so, but I haven't seen you for quite a few years. So what have you been up to? Tell me what's been going on in the last 7 or 8 years.
7 or 8 years. Wow. So I left Centrify where we worked together. I joined a startup, spent 4 years working at that startup called Styra. And then I left that one and had a little bit of a break. And then I started my next startup, which is Inception Cyber, right? But this is the first one I've started on my own, right? So this is where I'm a founder of the company. The prior one, I joined as CEO, right? So I always joke, right? My career has kind of gone from large companies managing lots of people to going down and down and down and down, right? To basically doing everything now, right? So it's been a fun kind of journey, right? So that's what I've been up to. It's had its ups and downs, like all of these career changes and so forth, right?
Absolutely. And obviously, for those that don't know you, you live in the US, but don't have the American accent. So how did you end up moving from the UK to sunny California?
Yeah, so I'm a Brit, I'm born and educated in Birmingham, and I have not lost my Birmingham accent for those of you who can distinguish the Birmingham accent. So I went to Aston University. I met my fiancée and my wife, right? And my wife is a big traveler. She's an aerospace engineer. And I basically follow her, right? I can't say I moved here, I followed her, right? So she went to Kingston University and landed a job at Boeing in Southern California, and that's how we ended up in America. And then it was like, let me get a job in America, right? So there was no kind of a strategy to it, to be honest. It was like, let me land a job in America, right? And I luckily landed my first job in America in Santa Clara, of all places, and that's kind of how the journey started, right? And I've moved around America mainly to follow her as her career has kind of moved around. But yeah, we've basically been in California, then New York, and then back to California. It's funny about California because I just mentioned, Southern California. So when I was looking for my job from the UK to go to California, I was just like, let me just get a job in California. And I accepted a job in California. I really didn't know the map of California, the distances between Southern California and Northern California. And there I was. She was working in Long Beach, California, which is Southern California. I landed a job in Santa Clara, which is like 600 miles apart, and a 1-hour flight. And I had to do that job because of green cards and all this kind of stuff, right? For 6 years. So still, I commuted between Northern and Southern California from Mondays to Fridays. So it was just and now that I think that I did that, I can't believe it. But yes, just the things you do, right, when you're young.
The things you do. Yeah, when you've got more energy and less commitments.
That's right. That's right.
That's crazy. That's crazy. And so how did you end up in the Bay Area where you are now?
So when we were working together at CA, Computer Associates, right? I had acquired a number of companies, but the last company I had acquired was Arcod, which is a strong authentication company. So for people who use people who use their Visa cards or their Mastercard cards online, they might have seen something called Verified by Visa or Mastercard secure code on the screen when they authenticate the transaction. So that's the company that was building that. So they asked me to move to California to run that business. And that's how I got relocated from New York to California. And so that's how I landed there. And that's then the journey to go to Centrify, where we work together. And so then I've been in the Bay Area since 2013 now, right? So it's about 15 years or so in the Bay Area. And yeah, hopefully this is the last place I live now, right? I don't have plans to moving around again, right? So
Excellent. And so going from those massive, big, enterprise organizations like CA, and then sort of gradually getting a bit smaller with Centrify. I think we were about 500 people around about the time you were there. And then going to
even
start.
smaller, and then got it even smaller.
Yeah. What have been the biggest challenges for you in kind of taking that shift?
I think the biggest challenge has been convincing people that I can actually work at a more granular level and do a job in a smaller company. I remember um, interviewing for the job at Centrify, and at that time when I was interviewing for companies at that size, people would always think that hey, this guy's can manage 600 people. He's never going to be able to do A, B, and C, right? They always think you're a corporate kind of person and so forth. So that's been the struggle. And I saw that struggle also when I moved from Centrify to the next startup. The question was, oh, you can work in a 500-person organization. Can you work in a 30-person organization? And and then you doubt yourself as well, of course, right? When you go from there to like, can I actually start something up myself with nothing, right? With a clean sheet of paper. So yeah, that's been the struggle, and it's pretty valid, right? Because when you meet a lot of people who've worked in large companies, they know how to manage organizations and really well. They know how to coordinate and so forth. But when you give them a task, they can't do it. They can't. They're not hands on, um, which is not necessary in those kind of environments. But when you're working in smaller organizations, you have to be able to roll up your sleeves. You have to be able to do everything yourselves, right? And that's the kind of the balancing act, I think, right? And I think that I'm one of those people who can do those things. I'm even when I was at a large company, I was doing a lot of things myself, and maybe that's why I struggled at large companies because I'm kind of like a doer kind of person, and but certainly that was one of the struggles, right? In terms of kind of moving down or shifting down, right? And the worst part of shifting down is you're doing all these things that you used to tell n a number of people to do before for you, and you have to do yourself. And you have so much empathy now for people who do other things, right? So and certainly since I left Centrify, because I had a pretty senior role there, and I had a product management organization, I had a marketing organization, and I never did a lot of things myself. I didn't have to. I was a good at ideas, but the ideas were implemented for other people. But now, um, having to do all this stuff yourself, you just get so much empathy for all the challenges everybody goes through, right?
So with all those changes and kind of adapting and being super hands-on, that's all well and good as the company size sort of shrinks and you move. And then you move to Styra. And then after Styra, you decided rather than going and being a CEO, which could have very easily done any startup or bigger organization with that great experience that you've got, what possessed you to then go, I'm going to start up a business, from scratch?
Well, it was a couple of factors. It's not a straight line and so forth, right? So, um, I think after Styra, I was kind of like, yeah, maybe I'll go and join an existing company. And what's interesting is, my background's predominantly product management. I define myself as a product manager. It doesn't matter what kind of titles I've got. I've always defined myself as a product manager. And and for those of you who are listening, product managers are people who understand why a product needs to be built, right? Who the customer is, what the problem is, what the solution is. They're not particularly building it, but they do everything around that product. And what I was finding was I was talking to various companies and in leadership positions for product management, and you get the same old problems, which is, the product's not selling well. Can you help us solve that problem? right? There's this new competitor coming to the market. Can you solve that problem, right? And you kind of sit back and like, hold on, really, I've got the role of the CEO problem here. It doesn't matter that they call it product management, but the challenge I'm going to be having is solving the big question, which is, you know, understanding the customer, understanding why the product is not selling, why isn't there a product market fit, et cetera, et cetera. And you kind of like, well, at least for me, you kind of like ask yourself, do I want to do this for somebody else or do I want to do it myself? Because it's the same role, you know. It might be a bigger company, but it's the same role and it's the same challenge, right? And it's the same amount of pressure that, people can apply on you because, irrespective of being a large organization or a small organization, you still have to find product market fit. You still have to understand competition. And that was kind of like leaned me down the path of like doing something on my own. And obviously, it wasn't as simple as that. There was the factor of, as just for the listeners, our previous company we worked together was Centrify. It was all about identity. And, we were there, in the 2013 to 2018 timeframe where we were trying to educate the market on how important identity management is and privileged identity management and so forth. Fast forward to 2025, everybody understands it now, right? It's a massive market. There's so many players, but we were early. We were early with zero trust, which is, plastered everybody everywhere in security. Um, so it was one of those things. One of the takeaways I had from that was, we were working on security, preventative security, and I started asking myself a simple question, which is, why are these threats coming into the organization in the first place? I mean, I know the answer, but I started asking myself that question, and I also said to myself, and I definitely said this to myself, which is I don't want to go into a new market. I don't want to establish a new market because that's what I was doing at Styra, was establish a new market, and I saw the struggles with trying to establish a new market. And we can go into that, if you want to, but that was trying to sell to developers and building a new market. But I certainly said to myself, I don't want to establish a new market. I want to stick within an established market. But then asking myself why these threats were happening, I ended up, you know, networking to people who are also thinking about the same kind of problem as well. And that kind of led me to my co-founder who was, deeply thinking about why threats were coming via emails. And we all know email is the number one threat vector. We all know there's a very mature, established market. There's companies like in the UK, there's Darktrace and Mimecast, there's Proofpoint. And in email security is the first thing anybody does if you're an enterprise to safeguard yourself. So to me, it was kind of like it was intellectually kind of stimulating, which is like, wow, very large established market. But this is where the stuff gets through, which companies like Centrify were trying to solve. And is there something new and innovative we can do to solve that problem? And this is something about me. I always kind of try to tackle and work on kind of deep tech kind of problems. I'm not looking for a simple, well, it's simple to me at least, right? An app that I can run on my phone to buy and sell something. I mean, that's not interesting to me. It's always what's interesting to me is something difficult. Um, and I don't know why, but that's what I resonate to. And, solving threats coming in by email is a very complex problem. And there's, technologies like signature technologies and sandbox technologies and machine learning and behavioral analysis that all the vendors have been using. And it was kind of intriguing to me, like, can we do something to make that better? And this is all now in the past now, but 2 years ago, AI turned up and and I'm old enough to see all these technology kind of changes. Where we went from Unix, which is where I grew up, to kind of Windows platform to then cloud computing, and now AI turns up. And being in Silicon Valley, you tend to kind of um, you know network, and there's so much kind of passion around technology here. You learn a lot by just being here. You recognize that there's a new set of problems, there's a new set of solutions to existing problems with AI. And that's kind of like led me down the path of saying, okay, let's try this thing out, right? So anyway, that's how we kind of got ourselves into that, right? Um, but it wasn't a straight line like anything, right? Try a whole bunch of things out and then you end up somewhere and like, okay, we're going to do this, right?
So it's a difficult problem.
Mm.
It's in what I would describe as, where cybersecurity kind of really kicked off. Back in the sort of early 2000s, there were so many players out there doing on-premise. SaaS was a very new thing. And it's been around for a long time, the threat through email. What is it that you guys are doing to help the threats of today, but also, moving forward?
Yeah. That's the right question to ask, right? So the answer to that is twofold. One is when we look at the threats that are coming into the organization that existing companies cannot stop, they're called evasive threats. And they're called evasive because they evade obviously the detection technologies of the existing vendors. And when you double click on that problem, what you find is the bad actors are doing anything to evade these defenses, and they're using some of the weaknesses in the current technologies, right? So the current technologies I mentioned in before are things like signature and sandbox and ML and behavior. So one of the things that they do is, and the audience probably knows this, right? So when you have a phishing attack, there's a URL or the page that the bad guys want you to eventually get to. Okay. And what the bad guys do is they somehow hide that page from the detecting technologies. They sometimes put a capture in between. So it's got to authenticate Natalie before you can, or you could declare that you're not a robot before you can get to the end page. So they are using techniques like that, or they're encrypting or they're obfuscating payloads if there's an attachment, or they're using, you know, uh, other language within the email. So keyword scanning and kind of old school natural language processing won't be able to detect it. So that's what they're doing to evade these attacks. And it's obviously a big problem because, one of the first questions I ask myself, and I look at it the same way, which is all these vendors, established markets, so much kind of very successful vendors, but why is it that all these companies are getting breached? Something's wrong, right? I mean, all these later stage companies don't exist if it wasn't for the breach. If this stuff was working, why do we need the other companies that we've worked at? I mean, I'm making it simple, but there's some logic to that. I mean, why do you need these companies if this stuff was working very well? It's because the defenses are just not good enough, right? So that's one big problem, right? But the next big problem, which is the new problem, is now the bad guys have got AI on their side, just like we are all using ChatGPT and all these tools to um, enable us to do so many more things. Um, the bad guys have also got it as well. There's something called Fraud GPT now. It's in the dark web. And it's basically a toolkit for the bad guys to generate phishing attacks and email attacks. And, you can generate variations of language and so forth. So in general, what's happening with AI now is AI allows them to scale attacks with a lot of precision. They can, write something that looks up your LinkedIn page, finds out that you and I might have spoken, finds my email, generates an email from you, sends it to me. I mean, that's the level of attacks that these bad guys are doing. And the variations are through the roof now. I mean, in the past, you would get a QR code. Now AI can generate a unique QR code for everybody in the company. So how are the existing defenses going to be able to protect the organization when the bad guys have got these powerful tools, right? And so you almost need to fight AI with AI, right? And that's what we're doing, right? And then there's other dimension of AI, which is, I'm sure the audiences, heard about Copilot now from Microsoft and all these agentic capabilities that are coming out now. And these agentic capabilities are soon going to be reading our emails and responding to emails. I mean, you're in marketing, that's already happening in the marketing arena at a somewhat primitive level. But these are going to be very smart. They're going to be, understanding, your email traffic and responding back. So all these existing tools out there which do behavioral analysis where they understand who Bill is sending and receiving emails from, that's not going to be very effective anymore because the emails are going to be written by AI. Oh, by the way, they're going to be grammatically correct. There's not going to be any spelling mistakes. So all this education, what we tell employees got to look for spelling mistakes. I'm not saying education is not good, but it's the value of it's going to go down very quickly over time in the next 6 months year because so you take you step back for a second. That's the reason, which is, can we build a better solution now? I mean, the form factor is the same, email still coming through. And look, email's obviously expanded out to where we're communicating by Slack and Zoom and Teams and so forth, right? But that's still the number one threat vector. And it's gonna fundamentally change now, right? So that was the reason to build a new company, right, is solve an existing problem, which is the weakness within current products, but solve the new problem, which is bad guys about AI. And to solve it with this new platform, which is AI, which allows you to do things that we couldn't do in previous technologies, right? So does that make sense?
It does. It does. And you've said some really scary things there about, AI writing emails and stuff. And, I think it's gonna help in so many ways, but there's also some areas where you just don't think about the fact that things are gonna be more sophisticated. Most people can identify a dodgy Amazon email coming to their account and know not to click on links and know these things. But the cleverer these attacks get, the harder it is to differentiate what's real and what's not. So yeah, super interesting. And then in terms of your journey, and you're at home at the moment, I know because obviously Luke came to say hi. Um, when we worked together, one of the great things, certainly when I moved to the States, was being able to kind of jump in a room, get a whiteboard, draw on the whiteboard, do some brainstorming. We were, everybody was in the office. I don't think anybody worked from home pretty much. And one of the great things about that was we were able to, pivot and make decisions quickly and get things done. How do you think that has changed for you? Because I know, leaving Centrify and then going on to Styra, I think they were remote first, weren't they?
No, they were in the office first, and then we became remote.
Right. Okay. So in that journey, obviously post-COVID, they then chose to close the office. And so what do you think has changed in your personal approach to how you're making things happen, being based from home?
Well, so I'm a people person, so I like interacting with people. That's always just the thing that works for me. So the thing that I've found that works for me is before I can really work effectively with somebody online, I mean, in a remote environment, I need to know them really, really well. And so simple solution to that is only hiring people that I've worked with in the past because I know their personality. I know how to work with them already, right? Because I think um, you know, going remote is much easier when you've already got a working relationship with others, right? But then when you're trying to hire new people and you're hiring them in a remote environment, that is very, very tough. So what I've tried to do is for the people I work very closely to and are, you know, in my geography, I've ended up spending a lot of time with them in physical meetings, right? WeWorks, et cetera, et cetera. And certainly I've done that with my co-founder, who I did not know before we started the journey. Um, but that's the thing I've been doing. But I do struggle a lot with working with. I mean, look, I work, but when you're collaborating, is I think the key thing, right? I mean, certainly in the jobs we've done in the past, there's a lot of collaboration. And sometimes I'm on a call with colleagues at the company for hours because we're working on slides and so forth. And you can only do that because you've worked with them before. And I think I still struggle with trying to do that collaboration with people who haven't worked with me before because, 3 hours on a Zoom call, it can be terrible if you don't know the person. It's easy when you work with a person before, right? So that's a struggle. But I think for me, I I kind of welcome going back into the office. We're too small at the moment. We've decided at the moment it's more economical for us to where we are at the moment and not to have an office, but we will get an office and it will be probably a 3 day kind of, in the office kind of, environment. I'm a big believer in that. I mean, I've done it I mean, maybe I'm old school, but I still think that, you know, um, getting together a couple of days of the week is kind of very important, right? For like
Mm.
in an effective organization and so forth.
I totally agree. And I think there has definitely been a shift in how our lives are and that blend, just by being able to take the dog out for a walk if you need a breather, or being able to pick your kids up and do those kind of things, versus kind of that structured day. So interesting to hear that you're.
I mean, I've always been a big believer in a lot of flexibility. I used to take my kid into, when we were at CA, we had the daycare on site. So I used to take my kid in back and forth. So I've been very, high on all the flexibility. And I'm also a thinker as well. So I had the privilege at Centrify when we worked together. I had my own office. So I could shut the door and just think. And, if somebody was coming to my office, they might think I'm not working, but the thinking from my point of view is working, right? So I'm one of those people who need that kind of flexibility. So if I went into an old school working environment where everybody's kind of like looking over my head and making sure I'm working all the time, that just would not work for me. I remember when I started my career in the UK and used to be in cubicles, I just couldn't work in that environment anymore, right? So I think I'm one of those folks who needs a lot of flexibility. Um, so when I take my dog for a walk, I'm still working, right? But I need that way to I do walking calls. I'm on LinkedIn or I'm doing something, right? So I think that's the kind of flexibility that people didn't have, and then they love the fact that they went into their home office environment, and now we've got to have that kind of blending environment in the new work environment as well.
I agree, and I think that there always needs to be flexibility, and I think there was a point, certainly in my career when I first started out, that when you're at work, you're at work, and you couldn't take any personal calls and all these kind of things. And now things have definitely shifted, even down to what we wear, for work. If we do go into an office, I think things are a lot more casual, in the way that we do things, which I think is welcomed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, in terms of the state that, Inception Cyber are today, how big are you? How many people do you have today?
We are a small company still. We're what's called series pre-seed. So we raised funding last year. Neotribe Ventures funded us, and we're just over 12 people now as an organization. So pretty small. Um, Mostly engineering, because the first part of the focus was to build the product out, and we're now starting to, um, you know, talk to prospects, and we're in deployments and so forth, right? But it's really, we're building something complex, right? So we focused our entities since last year when we got funding on building the core platform, building the key capabilities. We had to test out models, we had to train our models and so forth, like all these AI companies have to, right? So that was kind of the focus of the company. And building these deep tech companies doesn't happen overnight. This is not a 3 months kind of build something and throw it over the fence, right? And certainly, like you had said earlier on, there's established players in the marketplace. So your entry level product has to be as good as those, but better, because it's going to be able to detect, AI threats that those vendors cannot detect. And the target audience always has something there already. So you're always going into an organization where you're proving to the prospect that you've got a better tool to fix email security. And so it's a completely different kind of go to market strategy from the identity space or the developer space, all these other spaces, because it's an established market, right? Which is got its own challenges as well. But anyway, that's the size of the company at the moment, and we're we'll we'll we're getting ready to do our next raise soon as well. So which is the process that all companies kind of go through, right?
Yeah, very busy time for you guys. And with that, what are your sort of plans for the next 18 months to 2 years in terms of where you see yourselves going?
It's pretty simple. The plans are uh, get as much customer feedback, because I think in fact, that is the most important thing, is getting enough deployments and customer feedback, because in the end, and I'm a bit biased, I'm a product guy. And so the world kind of revolves around products for me. And 'cause in the end, I think that's the one thing I can control, is how we build a product and what features are going to be in that product. And then the rest is um, the capabilities you put around it, such as scaling the organization, such as go to market. Look, go to market is not easy. I'm the first one to say now that um, one of my I have a lot of empathy now for folks like you in marketing and sales and so forth, because that's not where I come from. I come from the product side. Uh, but I have a lot of empathy for it, because I was saying this to somebody else recently. I think it's become easier to build products with all the tools and so forth, and but go to market is still very, very difficult. And so I think, yeah, so the focus is really building product, getting deployments, learning from them, and kind of scaling from that point onwards, right? And look, startups are not easy, right? Most startups, like 99%, I'm sure, right, are unsuccessful, right? So it's a journey, right? And you've got to just like keep on kind of working at it, and until you can find that kind of right product market fit. And certainly, we're not at that stage at the moment. Um, and that's the journey, is just get to product market fit. And product market fit, obviously, well, not obvious, but it's not just getting, because it's called product market fit, a product that is acceptable by a customer, but it's also the go to market around it as well. Can you have a playbook where a salesperson can use a certain message to generate a conversation? Can you then deploy the product successfully within a short amount of time? Can you then do a POC successfully? Can the customer see value in a certain amount of time? Can you close that deal? That's product market fit from my point of view. It used to be, if you had asked me this question, I don't know, when we worked at Centrify, it was like kind of product solve a particular problem. I was so product centric, right? Even though I'm very product centric, I become so kind of wider in terms of what it takes to have product market fit. So that's the goal, is to get product market fit, and if we're successful there, then we'll scale the organization.
Great. Well, I'll certainly be watching with interest. So finally, for those people that are on the podcast listening in and have either considered setting up their own business, maybe they're holding a senior position in an organization and they're looking to make that move, what advice would you give those individuals on taking that leap and starting their own business?
What advice? Stay with your current job. Don't do this.
I don't think that's what we're trying to get from this, Bill.
Yeah, I know, I know, I know. I think that I think it's hard for me to give advice on that particular subject, because I think it's such a everybody's on a personal journey, and I've speak to so many people who are in um, great positions at large companies, and they're like, "Oh, we want to do this thing," and I'm like, "You crazy? Why don't you just stay what you're doing, right?" Because everybody thinks the grass is greener somewhere else, right? Everybody does, right? And that's why I answered it that way. I think ultimately, I think the only advice I can give anybody is the kind of thing that the kind of advice the kind of motivation I have, which is, if you've got a burning desire to say, I want to do this, then you're going to do it, right? And in my case, I wanted to build my own company, I wanted to do something myself. I wanted to build my own culture in the company. I didn't want to have somebody else's culture to take over. I didn't want to have, I just want to do that myself, right? And even if it's a success or failure, at least I can blame myself and want to do it. That's the real reason I wanted to do it. Um, of course, everybody says, oh, well, it could be very successful. You can make a lot of money, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, those things are there. But for me, it was like, I want to just do this. And I'm only able to do it because I've done the jobs I've done in the past, right? Because it's given me the flexibility to say, okay, if this was a complete failure, then you know what, because I don't believe, I know everybody talks about risk and so forth, but I'm pretty risk adverse. Um, as an individual. So I'm old and I wanted to do it at the right kind of time where I thought that, okay, I'm not going to throw everything away if this is unsuccessful. But if you're in your mid-20s, I would absolutely tell you to do it because you got nothing to lose. But when you're in your middle part of your career, that's the toughest part to do. When you're in your, let's say, your mid-30s and you've got a great career somewhere, to walk away from that to do something like that, that's very risky. But if you got a passion for it, then you should do it. But don't do it if you think it's going to be greener in this environment or it's going to be easier, because it isn't, right? It's very, very difficult. And anybody who tells you it's not, it's just lying. It's extremely difficult. You wake up in the morning, you sometimes have, you have all the different types of feelings within one day. That's how I describe it to people, right? You can feel really good, 9 o'clock in the morning. And then you have an email from somebody that kind of like takes you off and you're like, oh my God, the whole world's going to fall apart, right? So it's a lot of those swings, right? So you need to be able to manage your kind of emotions a lot, and when you're doing this, and because it's not an easy journey, but building something is not easy. It's never going to be easy. But if you want to kind of if you got that kind of passion that I want to do this and fight through things, then it's all for you, right? So that's the only advice I would give people, right?
Great. Thank you so much, Bill. It's been an absolute pleasure catching up and having you on the show. Thanks so much.
I appreciate it. It's been fun talking to you.
That's it for this episode of Tech Startup Stories. Have a story you'd like us to share or a topic you'd want to cover? Reach out and we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, take care.